In epistemology, there's more than one way of knowing things, yeah? So obviously one of them is intuition, the other one is sense datum, like five senses, etc. Another third way is deduction, rationality, or whatever. And sometimes they can intermix. Like, for example, for you to make premises, you have to have some induced, like inductively reason. Sometimes, yeah, possibly. No, but like, for example, I say all men are mortal. Yeah, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. I still have to have perceived a man, and I have to have known what men are through my five senses. So induction and deduction mix with each other in that way. But intuition is kind of a standalone thing. So it comes by itself. It's like you just know you exist. You just know you. If I were to ask you how would you prove it logically, there would not necessarily be a method which you could use.
So isn't it then a belief then, by definition?
It comes by itself. It's like you just know you exist. You just know you. If I were to ask you how would you prove it logically, there would not necessarily be a method which you could use.
So isn't it then a belief then, by definition?
It's first-person experience.
That's a form of belief, I think.
You can. The thing is,
You're trusting your senses.
Look, the way Bertrand Russell talked about it, he wrote a book called The Problems of Philosophy, which is like one of the main basic books that a student of philosophy would learn.
Yeah, he's a logician, right?
Yeah, and what he said was that he defined knowledge, he defined belief as something which corresponds to, which is some information someone has which corresponds to, or either doesn't or does correspond to reality of some sort. So true belief is that which does correspond to reality, and false belief is that which does not correspond to reality. So the point is belief and knowledge and belief are not two, but the point is how did we achieve the knowledge? That's the more foundational question. So did you know it? And if you did know it, was it self-evident and so on? So we say, look, things like existence, there's no syllogism for how I can reason my own existence. There's no inductive method I can use to reason not just my own first-person subjective experience, but anything first-person at all, emotions included. Therefore, these things are unscientific in the sense that science does not have an access to them. So from that perspective, existence cannot be proven scientifically. Unless one reasons in a circle and says that we're going to check up human brains. But then if you're saying that you're checking up human brains using your first-person experience, then you'll be arguing in a circle, because you'll say, how do we know it's the human brain exists as the mind exists as the mind? You'll say we're using check the brain, and therefore we'll be arguing in a circle. So therefore, first-person experiences are first-person experiences. Science is in the third person, which means you have to do something to something. Whereas first-person experiences, I'm speaking about my own thing. So these are different forms of knowledge, and that's why, if you the beginning thing you said, you started off by saying that, well, could you not doubt everything? If we're using induction, abduction, or even deduction, I would agree with you. And I would agree with Fakhruddin al-Razi, who also said the same thing as you, which is that everything is ghalibu dhannin. Everything is a high probability. Like, we don't know anything for sure. However, if we put in the intuitive element, which is what Ibn Taymiyyah said in his contribution, then we have intuitive experiences, first person, which require no rationalization, systematic rationalization there. It would be beyond that. It would just be something you feel.
How much can you trust feelings though?
Yeah, so that's a question that it goes back to you. So that's what Nietzsche like. Nietzsche was saying, I think therefore I am, is problematic, because how do you know it's you that's thinking? So that's why probably the most concrete statement of fact you can make ever is that there is no doubt that there is existence. Now, how do we know that there's existence? Through feeling that. Now, if we don't have that intuitive knowledge, we wouldn't know existence existed. Now, obviously, it's corroborated by inductive methods, but it's not standard. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So, what we say as Muslims is that you're born with the belief that you exist, but also the belief in God. One God created, all those things. So you don't need, you don't need rationality in order to come to the conclusion of God. That's basically our premise.
You have the fitra.
You have the fitrah, yeah. Because you're born with it, like you're born with it, all those things. So you don't need, really, you don't need rationality in order to come to the conclusion of God. That's basically our premise.
You have the fitra.
You have the fitrah, yeah. Because you're born with it, like you're born with it, and you're not born believing in Jesus Christ as God or the Trinity or Guru Nanak as the Guru or even Prophet Muhammad, frankly, as a prophet. But you're born with just this intrinsic kind of submission to a higher being. That's how we kind of conceive it.
Isn't the only alternative to believing that God created reality is that I created reality? Isn't that the only alternative?
There's many alternatives like that. Like I said before, I is a presupposition.
Yeah.
So that's what Nietzsche said. I is a presupposition. It's a possessive presupposition. But the thing is about creation now is a question of we haven't even reached that point yet, because creation requires more like rationalization, cause and effect, dependency, all those arguments that are made. But I know because I feel it. That's actually a great answer. I feel that God exists is a legit expression of knowledge.
Mohammed, I wanted to talk to you about Extinction Rebellion because I was here back in, I think, March or something.
Yes.
And I was talking to you about it.
But can I just finish with him
Yeah,
and then?
sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So what you're saying is, so the instinct or intuition, you're saying this is more trustworthy than sense data and...
I think it's more foundational because
What do you mean foundation?
everything else depends on intuition.
Yeah. But why is that not a form of belief, like faith?
Well, look,
Intuition you're staking some faith in what you perceive.
if you don't have a premise that we exist, then nothing can be said about anything, right? So what I'm saying is that
We
premise.
work under the assumption.
Pardon?
We're working under that assumption.
Yeah. So because of that, what I'm saying is that because you're working under that assumption that we exist, and that's an intuited assumption. It's not you don't put that under a microscope. You don't put that into a chart. You don't deduce that. You feel that. You literally experience that. So because of that, it's the most foundational thing. Everything else depends on it, in fact.
There's also how you define it as well, right? Because obviously there's some cultures define existence in a different way. So their intuition would say, yeah, we exist, but in a different format to the way that maybe we define our existence, right? You have pantheists and stuff like this. They have that intuition, but their concept of existence is completely different. Right?
Well, there is something.
Something.
There is something.
Yeah.
I don't think you can get more foundational than that. Nothing, only nothing doesn't exist. There is an absence of nothingness.
Yeah.
Do you see the point?
Yeah.
There is an absence of nothingness. If we don't start with the absence of nothingness, then we can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And now the question is, why is there something rather than nothing? And that's a very, like, if you don't answer that, if you don't ask that question to yourself in this life, it's like you haven't asked yourself anything.
I agree.
It's like, why is there something rather than nothing? Why is it not why is there not a continuation of nothingness?
And to exist in a state of agnosticism on that topic,
It's impossible. Because even having agnosticism, saying I don't know, is saying by the way,
this is your topic.
I'll just hear out.
saying
I'll listen in the beginning.
agnostics will say I don't know.
But why is it what's the
Agnostics say I don't know.
with being in a state of
But when you say I don't know, you're making a statement of knowledge.
but this is skepticism.
Yeah, you're saying I don't know. How do you know you don't know?
Yeah.
How do you know? Yeah, right.
Think about it this way. You
Yeah,
think,
you're right.
you think that you know something.
I like this
You
one.
might think that you don't know something, but you think so. You're not absolutely sure that you don't know something. As I usually say, the full certainty is not comparable
we
to
just had that discussion.
the wise man's doubt.
But okay, doubt. When you say doubt, how do you define doubt?
Doubt is not being absolutely and utterly 100%
Sure,
about
right?
something.
But you're somewhat sure.
Oh yeah, of course.
All right, so you know
I have my
something.
senses, I have my approximation, but I understand that my senses are flawed, and
Yeah.
thus I can't.
So you're on the same path as I am. So I'm saying that the foundation, what I was saying to him is that foundationally, we have to say that there is something rather than nothing. And there's no room for agnosticism on this.
That's the assumption that I follow, even though I'm not sure of it.
And by the way, agnosticism proves this premise. So if someone says,
In
look,
which way?
brother, I forgot your name.
Ramsey.
So if someone says,
In
look,
which way?
brother, I forgot your name.
Ramsey.
Ramsey, yeah. Do you know the question that you asked about can there be agnosticism on the first premise of there is?
Can there be? But if you're in that state, why is that?
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that the first thing we said, the most foundational thing we can have in terms of a knowledge premise that I can possibly think of, I said there's no doubt that there's existence. He said, okay, well hold on, existence can be quantified or qualified.
Which way does existence exist?
But what I'm saying here is, what I said to him was, let's go even deeper than that. Yeah, there is no doubt. Forget about there's no doubt. There is something. That's my premise.
Okay, fine.
There you have it. Right?
You can assume it.
Yeah, there is something rather than nothing.
Yeah, of course, sure.
Yeah, of course. See, there's no agnosticism on that point.
No, but in which way does that something exist?
No, that's a different question.
I'll give you an
Yeah, no,
example.
I'm not
It's
going
a
to. I'm
different
not going
question.
there.
It's very relevant.
Yeah, I'm not going there though.
Mohammed, it's very relevant for this. Let me tell you why. Your reflection in the mirror, it's the same way you do, and at the same time, it's a different way of existing, even though it exists in the same plane of existence as you do. You know what I mean?
Yes.
To quantify existence and to qualify existence is where all the uncertainty comes, because something is. Something is.
Yeah. So that's
for
no
sure.
problem. But
What is?
something is. That's
Sure.
I like the way you put that. Something is. Yeah. Rather than nothing is.
Sure.
So we can actually falsify the statement that nothing is.
Okay, then we come again to the example of the mirror image. The mirror image exists, but it's not you. It's
Yeah.
not
No.
a
But
thinking
what's your
being.
name again, bro? Sorry.
Pavlov.
Pavlov. What's your name again, bro? Sorry.
Pavlov.
Pavlov. All right. So basically, what I was saying was that look. So there are some things we can falsify.
Of course, always.
Right,
You
no,
can
but
always falsify.
no, like because you were saying that there's something. Like, this was the discussion before you came along. The discussion before you came along is how do you know something is 100%? Is not everything susceptible to some kind of casting of aspersion? And we said that yes, but there's one thing which you cannot cast any philosophical aspersion of, and if you do, you'd be shooting yourself in the foot, which is this premise that something is.
Something is, sure.
Right?
can agree on that.
Because if you say I'm agnostic to the fact that something is, your agnosticism is evidence that something is, which is your agnosticism.
But again, it's
Right.
assumptions, though, isn't it?
But you see the point here? So it's
I
that,
don't think you're working at the agnosticism.
yeah. So if we start with something is, that premise that something is something which is so foundational that it's like the opposite of it, which is nothing is totally falsifiable.
Which is why a lot of the skeptics don't talk at all.
Absolutely.
They say nothing.
Yeah.
They can't make any
Brilliant.
assumption, you know?
Exactly. So here, that's the thing. If we say something is, now the question would be why or how or what?
The nature of it.
Yeah.
Ooh, but those are very, very
Or who
complicated
even,
questions.
yeah. You see, and that's when we come to the conclusion that, okay, we can't really come to conclusions right away, but we can ask the question, and this is what I believe is the first question we should be all asking. If we can falsify that nothing does not exist, or nothing is not a correct statement in its entire sense of the word, then the question is, why is there something rather than nothing?
That's my question.
Because
was
without
what-
something, nothing doesn't exist.
Say again?
Without something, nothingness doesn't exist.
Say that again?
Why though?
Yeah, why?
Without- Okay. I usually give this example. Imagine a blank. Okay. I usually give this example. Imagine a blank piece of paper, and you make a drawing on it with a.
Because I know what you were saying, but he's just saying
Go ahead.
the question is why is there something then nothing? It's not talking about the idea of nothing can't be possible without lining it with
Why is
something
there
else.
something
There
and
is something.
Yeah.
Why is there something rather than nothing?
The purpose
Fair
of
enough.
existence
Maybe I
is like
misunderstood.
that. Yeah.
So what do you think the challenge is with not maybe ignoring the question or not treating it with the same?
No, here's what I think. That look. Why is there something rather than nothing?
Why is that so important?
Yeah, that's because that's the foundational thing. If you didn't have the premise that there's something is, then we couldn't have any conversation, we wouldn't have any cognition, we would have no rationalization, there would be nothing to talk about, in a sense. The existence couldn't be justified.
Asking the question why it exists.
Why?
Why is that important?
Why is there something rather than nothing?
No, why does anything exist?
Why does anything exist is another way of putting it.
What question?
it's an important point. You can say I don't care about that question.
Well,
I can say it is important.
Existentialists will say that it's a secondary thing. It's not.
I see your point, but what I'm saying is that it's all like subjective. In a sense, you can make a point that it's not important. But this is where it becomes a bit of a theological discussion, or let's say philosophical discussion. Why is there something wrong with nothing? My point would be this, is that atheism offers no answers to that question.
You know, I'm glad that Will interrupted me because I think he was right about what he said. I wasn't really answering to the question. I thought of a different example. This is going to be a little experiment I'm going to do here. Let me ask you guys, does a pink flying elephant exist?
What, in your mind or something?
Now it exists because you imagined it. Okay. But the existence of the pink flying animal in your mind is obviously not the same quantification and qualification of existence. The pink flying animal in your mind is obviously not the same quantification and qualification of existence as a real, tangible, physical world pink flying elephant.
Okay.
It still exists in here, in your imagination, but it's not the same.
It's perceived in a different way.
Exactly. I think that's the focus you need to take. We might be the product of the imagination of a being infinitely more powerful than us.
Okay.
And if we are that product of imagination, then you are right. And we truly are completely and utterly powerless in the face of Allah or God or
that's all I needed to get
Yahweh,
from you, man.
or whoever you want to talk about.
That's all I need to say. I'm joking.
Go into the probability of.
But no, the point I'm
Exactly.
Do you know?
Of what I said being true.
Yeah, forget about probability for now, because we're trying to work on foundations. Because you can't build castles on thin air, right? So when we have this idea of okay, there's something rather than nothing, and now we question, why is there something rather than nothing? Now we got to ask ourselves, of the systems that are out there, philosophical, religious, or otherwise, what is incapable of answering this question? It's impossible for an atheist to have any tools to answer this question. Because atheism...
It's impossible for anybody to answer this question.
No. I would say that atheism has nothing to offer. It has no explanatory power. Pantheism has something, polytheism has something, monotheism has everything else, but that atheism has no explanatory power whatsoever at this point.
You think you need the metaphor?
That's why I'm not an
to answer
atheist.
that question.
See, this is how we slowly get them out of...
Yeah, do you believe you have to have?
You gotta get the
Do
gotcha
you believe you
mode.
have to have a metaphysical basis to address the question? You
Yeah.
can't answer the question without metaphysics. You can only answer it with metaphysics.
I think that foundationally, it's an intuitive metaphysics, so yeah, in that sense.
Intuitive.
Remember we said that,
But you said humans have intrinsic.
Yeah, that's a
belief in
metaphysics.
God, but I think that's a believing in God. think
You
that's
know,
something
that is a very interesting thing that we could talk about, and I actually changed my mind about that. Nowadays, most people who live have some kind of faith, some kind of belief. Maybe in a God, maybe in an entity, maybe in energy. Some people just believe in energy.
But in a higher source, in a higher
Yeah,
power.
exactly,
Right? Yeah.
exactly. Most people, the vast majority of people, have some kind of belief. And why is that? Why is it that the vast majority of people come to that conclusion? Well, because the people who chose a purpose for them, who chose to believe in something, are the ones who were more competitive in the game of life previously. They are the ones whose genes were passed on and whose similarities were passed on to their children, and thus it has been accumulated with generations and generations and generations that people have this it has been accumulated with generations and generations and generations that people have this most of the people have this idea that something must exist beyond me. You know what I mean?
It's every civilization in history. There is no example
Exactly.
of a prehistoric or
Exactly.
historic.
So it seems like an inbuilt
There's no
design,
atheist
right?
civilization in history.
Yeah, that's
Well,
yeah,
Because
that's
they
what I'm
chose
saying. Yeah.
purpose
You
for
could look at it
themselves.
as an outgrowth of the analytical capacity of the human mind.
Some people
Because
do.
we look for actors within the world.
Yeah.
We see someone doing something, we infer a motivation. We see something in the natural world.
Yeah.
We naturally want to infer a conscious motivation.
Agency, yeah.
Agency, exactly. So that is more or less an explanation for the outgrowth of a spiritual tradition, I would say. say
one of the explanations.
that's an explanation.
Yeah.
For example.
So you
What
would
I
say
wanted
it's-
to find out from you is if you're saying if there is a something instead of nothingness.
Alex, I'm sorry, the brother here was just asking me a question. I'll come to you then. Yeah.
You mentioned that there is a something. You mentioned that there is a something,
Yeah.
and that something. Is there a time where that something will cease to exist, or will that something exist forever?
So my understanding is that if there's something rather than nothing, for that something to be in existence, it must depend on something that is always in existence.
Always in existence.
Yeah, because if it isn't, then what? How do we explain its existence?
Maybe we can't.
No, because, and this goes back to the question of, and this is what I like the dependency argument for the God's existence, right? I say something has got to be necessary in his existence, something which has no
Argument for
beginning.
contingency is called, yeah?
Pardon?
Argument for contingency.
Yes. So
Why do we assume that?
because if you can't have an infinite regress of dependent things.
This is a philosophical point again. You know?
No, you can. You can have an infinite regress. The only... I think the point is very simple. Our mind requires something to be eternal. Whether it's the universe itself or God. The Big Bang theory seems to suggest that the universe is a contingent thing, but it doesn't prove that the universe is a contingent thing. So I think that the Big Bang theory suggests the universe has a beginning, and therefore it may suggest there might be something that causes existence. So now, whether it is God or the spaghetti monster, the point is that whatever you call it, Fred, God, the point is that it has certain characteristics which are is timeless, spaceless, and probably it has the traditional view of God.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the whole thing with the spaghetti monster, the problem with it is that it's not power, it's not timeless
I mean,
and
it's a
spaceless.
man. I mean, of course, it's an
Yeah.
object. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's not like something like consciousness or whatever. where it's
Yeah,
not-
so
it's not
that's what I'm
space-
saying.
spaceless.
The thesis that there's something which is necessary existence
Yeah,
is a very compelling thesis. Now,
I think it's a good argument.
yeah, but the thing is that the nature of it can't be really, we can't really speculate on the nature of it. Like you said, necessity, eternality, oneness, and the fact that it's not made out of parts or dependent parts, you can go that far, but you can't say that well, it's loving, it's merciful.
But to make it even simpler, I don't know if you know William Crane.
Yeah.
Well, he put it like very simple because he said, suppose that you got an explanation for something, yeah, which makes sense. Like for example, say you William Crane.
Yeah.
Well, he put it like very simple because he said, suppose that you got an explanation for something, yeah, which makes sense. Like for example, say you find like machines on the backside of the moon, and you say, oh, there must be intelligence here.
Yeah.
And if you don't know where this intelligence comes from, or you know how it looks like, what it looks like, it doesn't mean that you need to reject the explanation. So the explanation is still good, even if you don't know where this intelligence comes from, or
Exactly.
what it looks like.
Yeah.
Because by doing so, you don't have explanation what's happening.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Agreed. Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a very good argument. Yeah, I think atheists struggle with it here.
Yeah, I think they would. Yeah.
You're saying that beginning has always been infinite, has always been there. So we can't actually trace when it started. That's what you're saying.
Well, so we need something which has no beginning.
So it has no beginning and it has no end.
Yeah.
And we, as humans, we're just simply passing through from that existence.
Yeah. So we're explicable, or where the preponderance of the universe is explained through this necessary eternal agency.
Okay.
That everything that's dependent is ultimately dependent on something which is independent. It's as simple as that.
And then all of this, though, comes back to just belief, not evidence.
That's actually something which is quite rational. So this is, remember we talked about different fields of knowledge. This is more deduction now.
All right.
Yeah, so this is something we're rationalizing.
Okay, there's a little problem in
Yeah,
this
yeah.
ideology. So we are denying the infinite regression, instead choosing that, okay, there is a beginning cause, right, which you call God.
but something else, and which is not caused by it. Let me give you an example, right? So, for example, I can build a house. So I'm the cause for a house being built, yeah? But I die, and the house continues living, right? So the house is not dependent on me, but it's caused by me. You see
Still
that point?
exists, yeah.
So the person who built this building behind us, or the people, they caused it to exist. Or maybe the horse head didn't build it, yeah. They caused it to exist. But that horse head no longer depends on
Yeah, but for
the
there
people.
to be more houses, there need to be more people building the houses.
Accepted. But so what I'm saying is causation, which is defined as something which brings rise to phenomena, is different to dependency, which means something relying on something else. So for the house doesn't require those people that built it to rely on it. So when we say that everything dependent depends upon something else which is dependent, then you need to have something independent to allow all dependent things to exist. And not necessarily every cause has a so for the house doesn't require those people that built it to rely on it. So when we say that everything dependent depends upon something else which is dependent, then you need to have something independent to allow all dependent things to exist. Every effect has a cause, although that can be made. Same argument can be made
Not necessarily every
in conjunction.
effect has a cause.
Yeah, because you could say, look, you can say, for the sake of argument, I'm going to have an infinite regress of causes, and like you said, it's conceivable. It's not.
Yeah, it's conceivable. Yeah.
Even though I would say it's pretty difficult to conceive.
Yeah, it's hard to confuse, but it can be.
It's almost. I would say.
Perceiving things.
I would say it's for me it's illogical, but I can understand why someone would say that it's a timeless, there's a multiverse backwards. Yeah, I can understand why. But then the question would be, what does that multiverse depend on?
I got it, man. Nice talking to you anyway.
You too, man.
I'll see you always.
So that's what.
The problem of
But there's one thing I want to say, like that's from our theological Islamic perspective. Well, if you look at the basic definition of God, it's literally that. It's a Qul huwa Allahu ahad, He's one and only, Allahu samad, the thing that everything depends upon, and He depends upon nothing, the independent one basically. He's the necessary existence. So what we would say is that William Lane Craig, you mentioned him, he would take it that far, he would agree with these points, but then he would say God is 3 in 1 and 1 in 3, which is Trinity God. We would say that's problematic.
Trinity out.
So that's why we would say, look,
But I think it doesn't really matter. This whether.
Yeah, Trinity doesn't.
I think the problem with religions. They can be right, all of them. All of them. So one of them can be right, but I think that one of them can be right, but I think that all of them they try to use God arguments, like which philosophical arguments that are really good, and they try to track them back to their religion. I think it's not very fair because there's no direct connection between Islam and the God hypothesis. There's no direct connection between the God hypothesis. There's no direct connection between the Christians and the God hypothesis. So I think that the God hypothesis is something that needs to be taken separately, and then you can move to.
I think I actually agree. I agree with you.
Move to religion.
Yeah, I agree with you.
But I think there is very good evidence for God.
Yeah.
I'm quite sure.
What evidence is that?
Wait.
What we were just
Before we
discussing.
go, this is a completely different ramification of the conversation. But we need to know this. But before you do it, let me just clarify what I was saying a while ago. The same way that you use God to get out of the infinite regression paradox, God also is an infinite regression by himself, because God is infinite. And no matter how
But it
you
wouldn't
try
be a
to-
regression because it wouldn't go back. It just stays
Well,
back.
Not
if God is
necessarily, because it's
infinite,
just,
there are many parts of infinity that contradict each other. If God is infinite in
But
wisdom,
we wouldn't
knowledge,
say that.
benevolence,
We wouldn't say that is infinite.
power,
Say that
they
is eternal.
contradict each other.
The thing is, we haven't got to that stage yet, as we said, right?
Yeah.
He's right. The point that he made is interesting. Let me just quickly mention it. So he said that you're right. I would agree with you that you can't really say, okay, well, this is the God of, like I just said, right? This is the God of Quran, whatever, and therefore you have to be Muslim. That would be a ridiculous argument. But what we can do is we can say anything that does not fit these parameters that we've just talked about would be problematic because it's illogical. So, for example, if I said if God is a man, sorry to say, yeah. So, well, if you say God is a man, that denies his the eternity, the necessity, the so on and so forth. So we will not be able to.
They preach that God.
But we might. So what I'm saying is that we might not be able to prove religion necessarily in that sense, but we can dismiss religion. So we can say, look, this religion that chicken is God or a goat is God, necessarily in that sense, but we can dismiss religion. So we can say, look, this religion that chicken is God or a goat is God or a human being is God is a false religion because it says that, okay, something which is going to be unlimited is limited at the same time, which is a contradiction.
If
So,
God
and-
has
yeah,
unlimited
yeah,
power,
yeah.
he has the power to limit his power, to limit himself,
then-
or even to destroy himself.
I don't see any contradiction there.
No, but hold on.
Yeah.
But then, can I just come back on that? If God limits his power, if this necessary existence limits his power
Yeah.
to being not to being limited, then it stops being the necessary existence.
Well, he still has the possibility of coming back
No,
to
but
how
then
he
it would
was,
stop being God, right?
like Jesus.
No, but here's the thing: how would the question would be? What would be the explanation for the universe in that stage, or for existence?
No,
The God, okay, the explanation.
You see what
for
I'm
the
saying?
universe- I know.
Yeah.
Let's imagine, for example, that I share your belief in God. In that case, the God who created the universe and who made everything,
No longer
removed
God,
power because he stopped being God. He
Yeah, yeah.
removed the power.
So that's
from
fine. So you have no
himself.
God now. So now we have an atheistic world, right?
Well, without that initiation, without that beginning,
Yeah, yeah.
there's still the universe that God
Here's what I'm
created.
trying to say is that a necessary existence, by definition, can never cease to be. Because a necessary existence is something that can never be imagined in any other way. It's eternally one way. It can never change. It's something which is, in a sense, unchanging, right?
Look, but in that
Nothing,
case,
nothing can nothing can
go.
supervene on the nature of his necessity. So nothing can change him from being always there and always powerful. Now, if something does change that, then what we have is a state of affairs where existence becomes inexplicable again. So in other words, you always have to have a necessary existence that's eternal. If you don't have that, and you say, well, that necessary existence can limit itself, then in effect, that necessary existence would be a contingent existence. It would be a possible existence. It would no longer be a necessary existence. It would be something which can be envisaged in another way, and the universe and everything around us, even ourselves' existence, would not be explicable anymore. Therefore, a self-limiting God is no God at all. It's no God at all. If a God can limit himself and become a chicken or become an egg, then that thing that you were conceiving in the first place was no necessary existence. It was no God. It was something else that you thought was God.
in that case, he's not omnipotent.
Sorry,
I
you need
can-
to
I can
explain
fo-
that.
I can follow you.
So the God up there has the power to manifest himself as something small. That then limits.
If that, no, what I'm saying is that if
He's
that
saying
does
that
happen,
it's not possible.
then that's not possible. So if any of the natural attributes of this necessary being are limited, then that thing which we're talking about can't be God, because God is meant to be eternally powerful, eternally the same. Nothing changes God. Nothing changes is talking about can't be God, because God is meant to be eternally powerful, eternally the same. Nothing changes God. Nothing changes his nature, and so on. So if now it's limited, if the unlimited can limit themselves, then they become limited. And if they become limited, then it becomes inexplicable our existence or the existence for any possible existence. So in other words, an all-powerful God can always only be all-powerful. There can never be a stage where the all-powerful can be anything other than all-powerful. The necessary can be anything other than necessary.
So then what you're saying would challenge the gods of, say, the Olympian gods that the ancient Greeks believed in,
Yeah.
where that
No
God would
question.
come down,
Yeah.
manifest as
Yeah.
something,
No
and
question.
go on.
Monotheistic gods
In
challenge.
regards to what we were saying about existence always being there, never having a beginning, a middle, or an end, fine. If I choose to go down that path and believe in that, and it then comes back to the fact that I do not have evidence to prove that, am I then having some form of mental delusion?
Sorry, so beginning, middle, and end, what would
No,
you
no,
mean?
if I believe in the existence has always been there,
Yes.
that something has always been there.
Yes.
And I believe that something is a creator
Yes.
and is responsible for my creation.
Yes.
And even though I choose to go down that path, believe in it, but I cannot provide evidence for it, am I suffering from a mental delusion?
No, because you can't provide evidence for your own existence.
Okay.
None of us here can provide rational evidence for our own existence. So it's not always the case that something has to be verified inductively in order for it to be sensical or taken as a form of knowledge. Something can be something you feel. Like emotions are inexplicable. You can't. Happiness is not. You cannot put happiness under a microscope. You can put your brain under a microscope and say, okay, well, hold on. You know, these parts of
Dopamine under the microscope.
yeah, but you can say this is when happiness happens. The brain works in that way, but correlation doesn't always mean the brain works in that way. But correlation doesn't always mean causation. So you don't know what's causing what. Is it the happiness that is causing this, or is it the diet that's causing the happiness?
Yeah. That's the body by brother.
Yeah.
It's a quite a big one.
So I guess what I'm saying is that we can start eliminating things like pantheism and polytheism and conceptions of God, like you just mentioned, because they contradict the logical order. And I would also add to that, they contradict the intuitive order. No one is born believing that Zeus is God. No one is born believing that Muhammad is a messenger. No one is born believing that Jesus
I
is
don't think
God.
you can quite eliminate them. I'll tell you why.
Go.
Because, again, let's imagine that I share your belief, your monotheistic belief.
Yeah.
As you know, as you believe in, there is a devil, and there are angels, and there are jinns.
That's more of religious narratives.
What if, just like God created or the Roman gods, or whatever pantheon he decided to create, entities that are much less powerful than God himself, but that still exist, like the devil exists. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, it could be, but we have
we can't eliminate.
Yeah, but we have evidence for them. Have we got evidence for them?
But the pantheon,
The same evidence we got for
the pantheon that you're talking about.
for the one God.
It's not the same.
I mean, in which sense you say that there is? So the arguments for contingency, you don't find it convincing.
Argument for contingency.
Yeah, for contingency. The argument we've just spoken about.
That everything dependent has to initially go back to something independent.
Yeah, the infinite.
So we have evidence that suggests, at least suggests the universe has a beginning, but it suggests, they don't prove, but it suggests the universe has a beginning. So this could be to be seen as an evidence for the universe has a beginning, but it suggests, they don't prove, but it suggests the universe has a beginning. So this could be to be seen as an evidence for a being which like God. Then we got other evidence, for example, the design argument, which is quite powerful.
Oh, not at all.
Oh, no? Okay.
It's the watchmaker fallacy.
Okay. No, it's not.
Listen.
No, it's quite powerful.
Okay,
Do you not find this?
Intentionally designs things to suffer and designs it in a way that's
Okay, so
inefficient.
now wait a second. So we are moving from the design argument to the evil argument.
No, it doesn't even be evil.
Okay, it's not because you said the problem of suffering.
I said suffering. Something's not evil.
Okay. So let's go one each first. Design argument. Okay, design argument is not just about what you make or whatever. It's not just about the complexity of life, the reducible complexity, and all
I want
sorts
your
of-
arguments.
Okay, so the problem or the beginning of the universe. Okay, this is called the anthropic principle. Yeah? So that so we're here because there were the conditions for us, to rise. Yeah. So, but this doesn't follow from this argument. Doesn't follow that this was by chance. Okay, it could be by chance or design, because it's very simple. So suppose that
You're gonna give me John Leslie's example of the
wait a
guy
second.
shooting on the wall.
Yeah. So
You-
Leslie, yeah, he's a philosopher who said, suppose that you're in front of some soldier that are about to shoot you, yeah, and you're there.
Why are we using these metaphors
Okay.
to describe?
No, wait a second. No, I'm trying to make the point. Let me finish the point and then you go. Okay, they're about to shoot and you're there. They shoot and you, wow, I'm still alive. Incredible. Why is it so impressed that he's alive? Of course, incredible. Why is it so impressed that he's alive? Of course he's alive, because if he had got him, he would have been dead. But still, you need to wonder, you need to question yourself, were they so just drunk, or they did it on purpose? So the anthropic principle doesn't solve the problem whether there is
Chance.
is design or chance. It doesn't answer the question. It's just a statement of the factual fact that we need certain conditions for life to be, but it doesn't explain nothing. It's simply
to explain it.
no. It's just a matter of fact. Of course, you don't need to be hit by the soldier in order to be alive. Of course, that's a matter of fact, but it doesn't explain whether the soldier did it on purpose or
A question that I wanted to raise when you guys
so
were
the
talking.
anthropic principle is not an argument at all against the
But
fine-tuning.
actually,
running
you're
on
right, because
assumptions that we can't prove.
Richard Dawkins even mentions that. He says that I don't believe
running
in
on assumptions that we
anthropic.
can't prove.
Exactly.
So it's not like there's a high ground.
That's
Which
what it
assumption?
always comes when
Which
we speak
assumption?
about infinity. Infinity
no,
is an idea
Because
that
you're
goes
assuming
beyond
you're
our
assuming
logic. It
motivation.
breaks
Something that I wanted to say is that when we talk about this idea of, I think the words don't help us, like with creator and God and such, because we seem to imagine a being, right? So my question is like, why do some people infer that this entity has a will? It seems to have
Okay,
a will
good.
to do
Yeah.
things. Why
Okay.
could it not be a spontaneous force that creates spontaneously?
There are some arguments for
How
this.
do you ascribe it
There are
to
some
will?
there are some arguments for that. You wanna- yeah.
One of the arguments is simply because God wanted us to be here. He wants to create such a being like us, for example,
But why?
to experience life.
But then I could say, what's the why to that?
Parents wants to make a child.
Before we get to what's your name again,
We're
bro?
equating man to God.
What's your
Yeah,
name?
but
Then we're,
yeah, but
then
the
we're
child of
making
parents
it-
is equal to the parents. We are not equal to God. At least that's what you advocate for.
No, but you're not responding to my argument.
I am
said-
responding to your
no.
argument.
Let me
Because you
come in-
can't
let me come in
compare
for a second.
God creating
'Cause-
humans to parents creating a child, because parents are equal to the child they create. God is not equal to the humans He
Yeah,
creates.
but I mean,
at least according to you.
I mean, in some religion, of course, you
Yeah,
have
but not in
that-
this religion. Not
no,
in
I mean, in some
monotheistic
religion, I mean, in different concept of God, God created us in His own image. For
He's
example.
equal to us.
Huh?
He's equal to us.
No, in His own image means that He created us.
No, but Pavlov, there's
as-
another. Sorry, one more
I
thing.
wanna know the
In
answer to that,
in
though.
terms of the will argument,
Okay.
because you asked. Now, first of all, one could argue we don't even need to go there in a sense.
I would like an answer though.
No. I mean, I will definitely give you one.
But then we go. But then I want to go to.
No, I'll give you what people have said.
But then I want to go to the problem.
Yeah.
The problem.
Well, one thing at a time, guys. One thing at a time. Let's not convolute. Let's not muddy the waters. So, in terms of the will, there's a theory called the theories of particularization. Now, the theory of particularization, or which referred to as takhsis, is written about by the medieval scholars. Is the idea that, for example, this cup here is one way rather than another way. So this cup here, for example, let's say it's a white cup, right? So it could have been a black cup. It's conceivable that it could have been a red cup or an orange cup. Of
course.
Okay. So the fact that it's one way rather than another,
You're going for Plato.
the question, no, not Plato. The question is that why is it one way rather than another way, right? So the fact that it could have been another way, and it's actually this way, implies that there's an external sorting mechanism. Now, for example, in the world that we live in, someone decided that I'm going to make this paper here going to be white rather than black. Some mind decided that. Some will decided that, right?
Just like God.
Not decided that. Some will decided that, right?
Just like God.
No, in this world here, right? So, for example, some guy in a
Yeah,
factory.
I know what you mean, but it's
Yeah.
it's equating that to
So,
God.
so the
attributes of
so
man.
so
give
the argument
to God.
the argument is that the fact
in
that the
most
universe is
philosophy-
the fact that the universe is one way rather than another way implies that there's an external sorting mechanism. Just in the same way as you would imply, if you see anything that can be conceived of in another way. Now, however, if you're not convinced with that argument, I'll say no problem.
Well, I just
Because the point
It's
is,
a lot like Plato, really, like Plato's world of perfect
Forms.
Of forms.
No,
exactly.
it's. I'll tell you where it corresponds with Plato. Plato says that there's an infinite amount of possibilities, and they're not actualized in the real world. So there's a mode of forms out there which has all of the other possibilities
The
in there.
absolute shape of everything.
Shapes, numbers, whatever. Yeah.
Ideas.
So he believed in that because he realized that how could it be that
Ideas.
So he believed in that because he realized that how could it be that everything that could potentially be is not in reality. So he said there must be some realm out there which is supersedes the realm that we live in. The point I'm making,
I disagree with him, by the way.
it's neither here nor there. I mean, lots of people disagree with him. But the point I'm making is that the fact that you have something which is one way when there was a choice, X amount of choices, suggests that there was an external sorting mechanism that decided on the choice. That decision is referred to as a will, because when you have so many different choices and there's one thing, because this is what one scholar, his name is Abu Bakr al-Baqillani, Arabic scholar, yeah? By the way, William Lane Craig takes all of his stuff from these guys, yeah? Just to let you know.
I know.
He wrote in his book called Tamheed, he goes this, he says, look, he actually mentions a jug. So it's handy that we have a cup in front of us. So look, you wise way, right? So he said, there's only, if you think about it, there's only 2 or 3 options you can think about as to why this cup is shaped in this way. Option A is that it has intrinsic qualities that allowed for it to be shaped in this way. So in other words, the cup has within it attributes that mean that it had to be like that. Right. So he says that, but if that was the case, everything with the same qualities would pop into existence at the same time. Because if it was self-explainable, and it's not explainable by an external sorting mechanism, then all of the things with exactly the same qualities would be in existence at the same place at the same time. So he says that if it was self-caused in that sense, self-caused, then it would be, then all of the things which have similar attributes would be self-caused in the same place and the same time. However, he says that that's illogical and impossible because we don't see that happening. Therefore, you require some external sorting mechanism. Therefore, you require some external sorting mechanism to decide on one rather than A rather than B, basically. The fact that you have A's rather than B's is evidence that you have someone deciding that A should be instead of B and B should be instead of A.
Let me give a different angle on this. Let's say that everything came into being at one point of time. Let's say this universe, right? The Big Bang type of idea. And this is something that's fascinating, is rather than we take individual objects or qualities of objects, rather than individual qualities of objects, we can take the reason why this is the way it is by the laws of physics, the physical laws of the universe. You understand me, right? The interactions between the quantum particles and things of a larger scale, these determine why things are the way they are. So the real interesting question, in my estimation, with physics is what is the constituent nature of the laws of physics? You understand? Like gravity, for example, this idea. The laws of physics. You understand? Like gravity, for example, this idea. What is that force made of? What does it do? How does it work? How does it interrelate? Because it seemingly is beyond the physical or something like that. Obviously, I don't understand it very well, but you understand what I'm saying? It's beyond matter. It's the interactions of matter.
Yes.
And what are the interactions?
You're talking about the uniformity of nature. Why is nature designed in this? Or why is it arranged in this way?
It's
because there is, I mean, in philosophy now, it's quite agreed that there is
constants, like gravitational constants.
Two main alternatives. One is the multiverse hypothesis, because this accounts for, because if it has an infinite number of universes with different sets of laws, therefore
all the possibilities are manifest.
It may be possible that there is a universe with these laws. But if there is no multiverse, then the fine-tuning argument is pose a very big question.
I would only disagree with you a little bit on this. I'll tell you why. I think that they changed the question. I'm not they. I mean, atheist propagandists. Not you. You're not a new atheist.
I'm not an atheist.
And I'll explain why. The question we are asking is that what's the possibility that these constants that we have, like for example the gravitational constant or whatever other constant,
Planck constant,
or by chance, or by chance,
or by chance. So in this case, the null hypothesis is chance. So we have two things that we're putting against each other. Either these constants were designed, and the null hypothesis.
Not really. There's only it's not
necessity is another thing.
This is a good point.
Necessity as well.
This is something interesting.
Let me make a point there.
Necessity, you're right, but that's impossible. It's impossible.
It's not that it's possible. It's just it doesn't make sense.
The problem I have when we go down these lines of argumentation is that we're always looking at it by necessity from a human perspective. by the rules
Yeah.
that we somehow have
Yeah.
inbuilt
Yeah, but we
within our-
discuss from a European perspective otherwise.
Well,
so what's the point of discussing,
Well,
man?
the point is that
So what's the point of discussing?
I think you're interrupting me because I'm making a good point.
Okay, sorry, carry on.
Let it.
So, when we're imagining beyond this realm, we're beyond the universe where this God maybe resides, or however you imagine it, we're still able to do that. I think this force might operate under any known rationale
Yeah.
that we can maybe
But
not imagine.
but what? Going back to the fine-tuning
I
point.
don't know how you can get
It's like a bi-dimensional
The-
being trying to understand a three-dimensional being.
Yeah,
it
right.
won't happen. No
Yeah, but
matter how hard it
but
tries.
yeah, I understand that. But I mean, according to fears, God created us.
Are you from Portugal or Brazil?
No, I'm Italian.
What is it? I don't know.
So, according to fears, God gave us logic and the apparatus of whatever. Fears.
Very
So,
broad
in order to discover him as well, as to discover the universe or the laws of physics or whatever, also to discover him. So that's why the same way we reason on the day-to-day basis should be helpful to get to the physics or whatever, also to discover him. So that's why the same way we reason on the day-to-day basis should be helpful to get to the
So
truth.
maybe you're right. But so maybe God is analogous to the laws of the universe, the physical laws of the universe.
No, because I'll tell you what.
Functionality.
No, it's not,
We
it's
do
not the
this-
same
But we
thing.
do okay, but we do discover that we use our tools and abilities of our mind to discover how, in a way, how the world works, how the universe works. Of
course.
And then we might extend that to realms that we can't perceive, that we imagine to exist, the metaphysical realm, and we project ourself on that. You know?
Yeah, it could
But
be.
the laws of the universe are not an actual entity, in the sense that
Well,
the law.
it might be.
No, in the sense that they don't actually exist. The reason why we say that they exist, like for example, the constants that we're talking about, like
That was the previous
Yeah, yeah,
point. They
so-
might have a constituent.
all we're looking at is arrangements. Like for example, now, if I was to look at the tree Z, yeah, or I'm going to group colors into the following schema, X, Y, Z. So really, what I'm doing is it's a human project that I'm trying to say, okay, let me look at the patterns that exist in nature historically.
That's our main method.
Yeah, and then see if there's any recurrence, and these are the laws of nature, right?
Yeah,
But so the laws of
senses.
the laws of nature don't actually exist in as much the same way as the universal animal doesn't exist. If I say, look, animal doesn't exist, what do you mean by that? I say, look, human being doesn't exist. Human beings exist. So for example, if I say to you, human being as a category, as a master class universalist category, doesn't actually exist in the real world. You can't find a human being, but you can find human beings in the sense that, how do we group human beings into one thing? We say, okay, well, if everything has, similarities between different classes, right, genuses. So I say, okay, well, this is similarity A, they will group them, we'll cluster them into this, right? I say, okay, well, this is similarity A, they will group them, we'll cluster them into this, right? But this,
Yeah, it's pretty much like saying
that
there is
categorization-
no chairs because what is a chair is
Yeah.
made of four legs.
so it's like set theory.
made of-
Set theory is like that. So that's why, by the way, that's one of the things Kurt Gödel was very powerful in making the point of. He said, look, set theory, is the set in the set theory, like, because the set theories you've got, like in mathematics, you've got X amount of numbers, yeah, or patterns, whatever, numerical patterns, sequences. Now you have those. Is the masterclass sequence? Does that go underneath? Is it categorized? Is it part of the sequence as well?
The problem of identity that we're in.
He was saying that it's a contradiction in a sense, right? So it's a problem with categorization. Now, the same thing is, the laws of nature don't exist as an entity of three-dimensional proportions.
Well, they might be beyond here, yes.
But what we do
see
have,
its effect.
we have the way we perceive nature, we refer to as laws. Now, but the more we refer to as laws. Now, but the more foundational question is, why is nature arranged in this way, which seems to have continuity, basically, right? You can call it the continuity of nature in certain ways. So why is that? Now, what can explain that? Either you have chance, or you have a deliberation. So either it's chance in the sense that, so there's two things.
But
Either
the
chance.
point he
Yeah.
was making is that this could be a man.
No. But what I'm saying is the null hypothesis.
I was saying the ideas of God are from our own understanding.
Yeah. So
No, but before that, so the laws of nature don't exist for us to say, oh, that's God, in a sense. But the secondary thing is this, is that you see the whole multiverse thing. The issue with it is this. We have a question, a mathematical question from total probability theory. We're saying, what is the probability that the universe could have these constants which are continuous, right? So now we assess it by so we make. Let me explain. So if I say the question, what is the probability that the constants, which are basically historical interactions between different elements of that which we can observe in the cosmos, interact with each other in X-ray, what is the probability that that could have been a chance? So what I'm doing is I'm deliberately making I'm making chance the null hypothesis. What the most common atheistic objection to this is that actually usually, all right, no, not you, no, but I'm not. That's why I'm just saying the most common objection. Think about atheist, agnostic, whatever. The objection is usually this: is usually that the null hypothesis should be the multiverse, the infinite multiverse, right? So instead of now the null hypothesis being chance, the null hypothesis becomes an infinite universe, right? Now, there's two issues. The other issue of this is you're changing the question effectively. You're changing the question of something that is what is the possibility that this universe could have been that could exist with these proportions? That's question A. We're changing it from this universe, which is a definite clause in the English language, to an indefinite. So we're saying now, question changes to what? What is the possibility that a universe, indefinite, can be, with these proportions? Now, if you say a universe and you make the null hypothesis an infinite multiverse, then you have the possibility of anything existing, including what, by the way? Including the truth of religion. No. Because there's a possibility that Muhammad existed and that he was a true prophet. That possibility materializes, basically, literally. So, but that's
the case.
Yeah.
Everything is possible.
So
in a certain realm of reality.
But now let's engage
So
this.
then Islam is the only religion to say
wasn't making the argument that
it's
you
the only true
proposed.
religion. So you have to, if that's possible, then it's true. I'm gonna
Well,
I'm
that's
just
why
being
we don't
facetious.
call ourselves.
Yeah.
Even though you
I
like
like
to
it,
brand
guys.
everyone.
I like
atheist.
But guys, it's been a pleasure. I'm gonna walk around.
I need to go. Next Sunday, I'm gonna come back.
It's been good, man. Thank you very much. Man.
Next time, if you're here
Thank
next
you, man.
Sunday.
What's your name, bro?
we're here on
Jan.
Sunday.
Jan.
Nice to meet you.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Hope this video was helpful for you. This may help others too, so please consider sharing, and we will bring more videos in the future, inshallah. So consider subscribing and you won't miss any. Jazakallahu khairan.